Hey everybody, welcome to the Tatiana Show. We're here in January 2016. I'm not really sure of the date. I think it's the 19th, January 19th. And I'm really excited for the show today because, well, first of all, hello Josh. Josh from Vaultoro, how are you doing today?
Tatiana, it's such a wonderful thing to be connected via the internet to you on this. What year is it?
2016.
2016.
I know, it's hard to remember. I like your shirt. You look very fancy today.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, I thought I'd, wash my hair and wear a shirt, get a real job.
Yes, I see that you're over at Vaultoro. Your brother is coding.
Yeah, he's
Um,
beavering away in the background there.
cool.
That's
So
good.
I'm really excited about the show today because, I wanted to have a little bit more art stuff, and we were going to have Troy from Crypto Art come on, but
Hmm.
he had a family emergency, so he wasn't able to make it. And instead, we're bringing on a fellow musician, my good friend Jordan Page. Jordan is a artist that I know from the Liberty Movement, and he
Okay.
was instrumental in kind of introducing me to everybody. We have done a million gigs singing together. People say that we're kind of like Bob Dylan and Joan Baez. And Jordan just put out a
Cool.
new song, and now we're having him on the show. Jordan, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us today.
What's up, people? Thanks for having me on.
Very cool. So, I don't know how to start. I guess, Jordan, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your background for those folks in the, we have two different audiences here. We have the Liberty.me people who most definitely know you, but some of the Bitcoiners may not be familiar with you, although you do stuff like with Bitcoin as well. Um, Jordan, tell us a little bit about your musical background and how you veered off into kind of more of a political and like a message-driven kind of thing.
Sure. Well, I'm an international man of mystery, as you know.
Indeed.
I got into music early on in life. It was always been like the central character in my life, and I knew that I had this I guess this inner knowledge that I was supposed to do something meaningful with it besides just self glorification and picking up chicks. And it hit me. I had this epiphany on December the 1st of 2006 in the middle of the night. I woke up from a dream, and I wrote this song called Pendulum, and it was a very politically themed song, had lots of political tones to it that I didn't understand because I wasn't a political person at all, like at all.
Oh,
And
really?
not at all, not even close. In fact, I was apolitical. I didn't want anything to do with it. People are having these conversations about foreign policy and war and economics. I'm like, God, keep me away from all that nonsense. And then I wrote this song, and I was scared of it, because I didn't understand it. I'm like, where does the song come from? And
Wow.
so I played the song at this big show I did a few weeks later, and the whole audience, it was like 400 people, stood up, and the thunderous applause. It was like crackling in my ears how loud this applause was. And I realized that these people in the audience, they know what the song's about. They understand what I'm talking about, but I don't. I have to go like figure out what this is all about. It was like a message from God, and I had to, Blues Brothers. I had to go and like, figure it out. And so I spent the next couple of years like really learning about the machinations of war and the Federal Reserve and the evil that the federal government perpetrates all over the world, creating all these problems for us here at home and for everybody all over the world. We have military bases in 193 countries. What? Really? I didn't know that.
Wacky.
And so I became an anti-war activist like overnight. I started writing all these songs. I dove headfirst into the deep end of like the Alex Jones madness rabbit hole, and had a very visceral, emotional reaction to very unpleasant truths. And I just committed myself to using my music to fight for truth and to subvert this horrifying system however I can. And so in that process, I was doing lots of shows all over the country. I had just kind of started making a name for myself within the Liberty community, and I hooked up with people like Adam Kokesh and Gary Franchi and Ernest Hancock, and these are all people that really shaped my political understanding as I went on. And then I met Congressman Ron Paul, and his campaign started hiring me to come and do openers for him at these huge events, like tens of thousands of people. I had never played for more than like 1,000 people at a time up to that point, and all of a sudden I'm playing for like 10, 12,000 people, and it was like, a mind-blowing experience. And what really blew my mind was how many of those people that I could see in the audience already knew the words to my songs. And that, like one night I'll be in a bar in Maryland where I was from, and I'll be playing for like 15 drunks who are eating pretzels and watching the game and could give a crap whether I'm like this annoying musician in the corner playing songs. And then the very next day fly to like, I don't know, Orlando, and I'm playing for like 6,000 people who like love my stuff and are like, like it was just this weird time, and it made it clear that I was supposed to be doing the freedom, liberty stuff, as opposed to playing covers in bars for people who could care less whether I was there. And then in that process, I've been all over the country. I've been in other countries, and I met Tatiana. I think in 2012, I think is when we met. And we did the Ron Paul Troops March to the White House event, where all the veterans like marched down from the Washington Monument to the White House, and they did an about face and turned their backs on the dictator in chief, and everybody held salutes for, I think it was like 21 minutes. It was like 1 second for every soldier who's committed suicide since the beginning of this conflict in the Middle East. And it was just a wild time. And then we did this huge concert that night with Amy Allen and Golden State and Rebel Inc. and we tore it up, girl. We totally did. And that was your first. That was our first event together for sure. Was that your first too?
That I always call that day the best day ever. It was.
Yeah.
It was
It
the
was an
best
awesome
day
day.
ever. It was amazing because, people don't realize when they say, oh, I support the troops. Well, the troops were the single biggest donors to the Ron Paul campaign.
Absolutely.
And it's kind of crazy that people don't realize that. We had, I guess, about 1,500 people show up for the march that day. And it was, a very peaceful, very moving, but very, intense event. And we got basically no media coverage. Nobody talks about that. Which I think was a problem that plagued the entire Ron Paul campaign was, when we were just a couple of months later in April, we were there, I think it was April 19th, we were in front of the Liberty Bell in Philly, and there were over 4,200 people there standing in the pouring rain, and the media was silent. And now when people get excited about Bernie Sanders and then they go on and on about how he's blocked in the media, I'm like, no, he's not. They love this guy. And I know what it's like to be blocked in the media because we were living that. And I think that when it's like they took the coolness of being the outsider and then they just applied it to a philosophy that doesn't necessarily, from even just a plain old economic standpoint, have any ability to be true, right? You can give people a bunch of free stuff, but somebody's going to pay for it.
I remember when I was in Australia, I was watching when I still gave a crap about politics, I was watching, when I was watching the Ron Paul thing unfold, I was, come on, you can do it, Ronnie. And, the grassroots movement was amazing. They were putting up blimps. They were, the first time around, it was just stunning to watch. And there was so much excitement behind this underdog. And you really saw the suppression and the control of the media at that stage, just deciding to ignore some amazing things. Like if some of the mainstream guys would have put up a blimp, or not even him, it was his followers were putting together money to put up a blimp, it would have been all over the news. And then he would win like certain areas, and then his people would get kicked out of the town hall, and his counts weren't being counted, and there was so much fraud, and it was so transparent, the fraud. Like, it was just in your face. It was pretty amazing watching how really sort of controlled the whole media circus is behind some of these massive elections in the US. It's not as extreme over here in Europe. The whole circus behind an election, you mainly just get posters of ugly faces on every um, on every lamppost, and you're meant to sort of decide on which party you vote for by the look of the face. It's ridiculous. So there's no, you know, but yeah, it was fascinating seeing the suppression of the media on these on these smaller candidates.
Well, the thing was, Ron was a mainstream candidate, and he was the elephant in the room like all the time. I mean, there was one debate I remember in South Carolina where he literally got 90 seconds to speak in like a 2 hour some debate. He got
Yeah, I remember
90
that.
seconds, and during those 90 seconds, he actually got booed by the people of South Carolina for saying that we should follow the example of Jesus when we are looking at our foreign policy and treat other people the way that we would want to be treated. And he said this, right? And there's this overwhelming boo from the entire audience. And I'm like, okay, I've definitely backed the right guy. Like, this is my guy.
Yeah.
And so that night he blew off the pundits. He didn't even give anybody any interviews. He was like, peace, I'm out,
Yeah. Drop the mic. Boom.
Oh yeah, he was done. He was done. So, but that's happening again. I mean, anybody who's on a national stage talking about liberty, talking about freedom issues, the people who own the media and who control the military-industrial complex and who are the real puppet masters in this situation, they don't want the slaves hearing about freedom. They don't want you to know that these things exist. No. Go back to sleep. Go back to your indoctrination camps and keep using your Federal Reserve notes and keep pulling your lever on election day and to have the illusion that you have some choice in your slavery. It's all nonsense. And Dr. Paul was just trying to wake people up, and I think he did a great job of that. And like, what we do with that is up to us. For me, I've decided that my life is all about freedom, and I don't care if people agree with me. They don't have to agree with me. It's not about me being right or wrong. I'm just putting out the truth as I see it, with music and with activism, and let the chips fall where they may. But whatever we're doing to push away from where we're going in the opposite direction toward some semblance of freedom, I'm all about it. And
I think that's spot on. And I mean, when Greece got their banking system shut down, and everyone was saying, "Oh, what's the EU? Is the EU going to Grexit, meaning Greek exit the EU?" And I was thinking, you know what? With Bitcoin and gold, you don't need the EU deciding if you're going to Grexit. You just do it yourself. You personally take your savings and exit. You personally take them and secure them for yourself. You don't need to wait for a mega bank or one of these mega states like the EU or the US to decide for you. And that's where something like the Bitcoin blockchain has really given power back to people to say, hey, you know what? You have the choice over your savings, of your especially older people who really don't have that much earning capacity left. They need to make pretty important decisions now with these choices being made around them, whether to print more money or not, when really you should secure your assets in something that can't be just on a whim of some decision of some central banker.
One of the things that I was going to say, after the 2012 election, this wasn't Jordan's first rodeo. He was involved in the 2008, and in general, local elections I think are a little bit more real, I guess. But after seeing what happened in 2012, it was a rude awakening for me, and I remember just being devastated because the Republican Party had this candidate who was getting tons of people to show up from the left, from the right, from the middle, all different types of people, young
Amazing.
people, old people, and everybody was putting so much effort and all their money into this candidate. And then what happened is that the Republican Party was breaking their own rules in order to keep this person out. And for me, it was a really like a moment of disillusionment from belief in the system. So now when people say to me, who are you voting for? I'm like laughing in their face. I'm like, ha, you think that there's voting. But, I think that there is a place for politics in that it is an educational mission, and I will, throw support behind candidates that have the libertarian mindset and believe in freedom. Whether or not they label themselves that way, that's one thing. But what I found was after 2012 and 2013, what I didn't anticipate, and Jordan, maybe you had anticipated this, but was a complete and total dive in terms of attendance at all these different events. People basically lost faith in that system. And what I loved about Bitcoin was, even though I had known about Bitcoin in 2012, I didn't really get it. I didn't really care. But then when I went to Jeffrey Tucker's event in October of 2013, a cryptocurrency convention, I didn't understand the tech, but I recognized that hope that I had been faced with when I was in the Ron Paul movement, that excitement. And what I liked also was that Bitcoin didn't force me to isolate myself from different people, because people are so brainwashed into believing I'm a Democrat, this is my team, or I'm a Republican, this is my team. Bitcoin allowed you to talk about the issues that a lot of people would agree on. I mean, who likes the cartel? Not many people are really into paying all these overage fees and all these extra fees and whatever. So basically, I got really excited about Bitcoin because I thought that it was a way that we could bring more people in. Jordan, what has been your experience since 2012 and going in to different things that you're kind of a little bit shifting into? How have you found your time since that heyday of libertarian philosophy?
It's been a challenge for sure, because of exactly what you just said, that there's been dwindling attendance. I think that a lot of people were heavily invested in the Ron Paul movement, and when at the RNC, when the ayes had it, before the vote had even been counted, and people were being more or less falsely imprisoned, to keep them from getting into the place to vote. There were a number of people who were kept on buses that were kept in motion. They were not allowed to leave the buses, and they were deliberately kept from missing the votes. I mean, just all that kind of nonsense. I think a lot of people gave up on the political process, and rightly so. The political process is not there to enfranchise anyone who's trying to change the system. The system itself requires compliance, and non-compliance is met with ridicule and marginalization.
Violence, really.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, exactly. And I think the last few years I've been doing a lot of touring, and it's been kind of grueling touring. It hasn't been like easy where I just show up and there's a huge PA and lights and there's a built-in huge massive audience and I can just get up there and do my thing and then hit the road. It's like
no snacks.
No snacks. Like the upfront costs are on me. I'm the one coordinating everything with different key people in areas, and it's been paying the bills, but it's been very, very difficult. And
no red Smartie riders, just red Smarties, nothing like that.
Well, for me, it was always blue M&Ms. I always had blue M&Ms in my contracts, and just to see if anyone was paying attention. And sometimes I would get them. It was awesome.
Really?
So
awesome.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Wow.
And but I've been really just trying to keep the remnants energized and to keep them from giving up. The people who are always showing up, to give them reason to hold on, to give them hope, and to energize them and bring these groups of people back together who, since the campaign and everything fizzled out, have gone their separate ways. I'm bringing these people back together, and I've seen a lot of good come from that. But now there's a lot of these issue-based movements now, which is what I really, really love. And like Bitcoin is a great example. Cannabis, huge example. Cannabis is kicking butt right now. The anti-Monsanto movement, the Second Amendment movement, jury nullification. There's all these movements that aren't centered around a person or a figurehead. They're centered around an issue or a concept that isn't like relevant or not relevant based on an election cycle. These things are always relevant, and so people can pour their energy into these things, and they're making a lot of headway. And it's like the food freedom movement. We have our mutual friend Liz Reitzig and her work with the food freedom movement. I mean, that's not dependent on an election cycle. It's a constant thing that we need to be focused on. So I'm seeing all of that came out to me. At least my perception of the rise of these things came out of the Ron Paul revolution, and that was worth going through all that stuff to begin with, just to have these things come about. And and most of the things that I talked about just now that I mentioned are all movements that I'm putting support behind, especially cannabis and the Second Amendment. I mean, like these things are huge issues for me. And to tie it all in to Bitcoin, I once I wrapped my mind around what Bitcoin was. Like at first I didn't know what the hell is this. You want me to
Same
give you
thing
money
here.
for some numbers in my phone? Like what does this even mean? But once I wrapped my mind around the blockchain technology and how this system completely subverts the Federal Reserve System, and if everyone was using it, the Federal Reserve System would collapse under the weight of its own, hypocrisy. They require our compliance in order to enslave us, and we are all debt slaves. I mean, most of us are debt slaves. Most people seem to be wage slaves too. We're all stuck in these paradigms that are just they're not even real. We make them real. Our compliance with the system makes it real. Bitcoin takes it's like all of a sudden being aware of a fourth dimension. All of a sudden, like, oh, really? I can do this? And anonymous peer-to-peer transactions that the government has no involvement in. Like, what a concept! And if everyone was using Bitcoin, we wouldn't have the unconstitutional, illegal wars of aggression all over the world. These adventures in imperialism, they wouldn't happen. They wouldn't exist because those things are funded by the DoD, who gets their money from the Fed.
You can't afford, and you see this over history, if anyone studies history and looked at it, monetary policy before a war has always gotten off a gold standard or gotten off an asset-based monetary policy. So before any major conflict, the aggressor will basically decouple their currency from an asset which they can't print out of nowhere, and just start printing money to pay soldiers because it's really expensive, folks, to run a war. It's ludicrously expensive. In fact, it's almost impossible for private parties to go to war. I mean, you do see it happen very rarely, like in the case of in South America with the drug kingpin, what was his name, Pablo Escobar, and stuff. But again, that again has to do with monopolies through state through some laws, basically allowing people to operate in a very, very profitable way by basically making it giving you a monopoly, and that's what we saw with Pablo. So it can happen, but generally, when you decouple a commodity from the currency, it can get scary. And now the whole world is decoupled. So, and again, like you said, Jordan, when you have the choice to compete against the Federal Reserve System, then that's all we're asking. We're not asking to overthrow. And this is what I love about the whole Bitcoin thing. It's not a revolution per se. It's not violent. There's nothing. It's basically just a peaceful exit, Charles.
But a peaceful exit from a system that is based and predicated on the use of violence and coercion to collect people's assent to it. It to me is a revolution. Yeah, of course it's non-violent, and that's what we want. We don't want violent revolution. I've got children, I mean, like, I don't want them growing up in a country that's torn by civil war. I don't want them to see that crap. I want us all to leave this world with our souls intact. But I would say that the peaceful exit itself is a massive revolution. It is a revolt because it's not complying with the system. It is a system that the only way it can maintain any semblance of legitimacy is through violence and coercion and fear. I mean, they do this to countries all over the world. They threaten them and sanction them and force them into this monetary system, which is just a massive scam. And Bitcoin is like the answer to all of that. Like you said, like it's a peaceful exit. We need a transition out of the Federal Reserve System, and it's not going to happen just overnight. It's going to happen gradually, but eventually it will happen. It's like Pantene, right?
I have no idea what the Pantene reference is.
It won't happen overnight, but it will happen,
Oh yeah. It'll happen. Won't it?
But
Yeah.
I have long hair, and you guys don't. How do I not know this reference? The interesting thing is that I talk with my dad sometimes, and my dad used to be a lot more political. Now, I don't know, he's off the rails a little bit politically, but he says, Tanya, it's impossible, it's impossible. But I don't agree with him because we have this ability to reach so many different people, and we have the internet, which is something that was completely unheard of, and we have cryptocurrencies. Now, as time has gone on, Bitcoin has become something that can be, to a certain extent, influenced by government, because if they, when you get out of the Bitcoin system and you touch down into the meat space, sort of a gross expression, but, there is some censorship that can occur. But Josh and I, we just had Luis on from Vermont a couple of weeks ago, which is a project that I just learned about. I'm super excited. And there are solutions being created to have less censorship interacting with Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, so to keep that spirit going. But I do think that the media has a lot to do with it. And I was just on Facebook the other day. God, I hate going on there. And yet somehow I find myself on there. And I had a friend of mine saying, the alternative media is the problem, because sometimes alternative media is unverified. And that's true. I think that there's a lot of media out there of all types that is not really necessarily good journalism. It's agenda driven. But I was a little scared off to see him saying that 9/11 definitely happened the way that they said that it did, and that these alternative medias are dangerous and irresponsible. And this is somebody who's not an idiot, right? And yet he was still kind of in the matrix. So I do have some concerns about getting people out, but I guess that's something that does have to happen gradually. And as people see how ridiculous the mainstream media is, maybe more people join our ranks. Do you guys think that people, especially people being into Bernie, I mean, do you think that people are waking up, or do you think that they're being just further brainwashed? How do you think that we're progressing in that regard?
Well, me personally, I think this whole Bernie Sanders, Donald Trump phenomenon is really kind of it's like it's stirring everybody up but it's revealing where people actually are. The fact that Donald Trump has the amount of does really shows you how the American people in general seem to feel about immigration. Just as one of his main topics, and it's all a little scary. What the scariest part for me is the Ron Paul people who are now Bernie Sanders people saying that he's the new Ron Paul. That's just complete insanity to me. They could not be more polar opposite. Maybe they have similar positions on a couple of key issues, but by and large they are on opposite ends of the spectrum. And I've said this before, like short of Rand Paul, there's no candidate on the ticket that's a serious candidate that their election does not result in the apocalypse. It's scary as hell to me to see these characters, this cast of literally almost like cartoon characters on the stage who are all screaming that they want World War III. I mean, this is where we are, and Rand Paul is the only one who is saying anything that makes any sense whatsoever. So I mean, I'm if I were still a political person, meaning really involved in the political process, Rand's the only one that's getting my support whatsoever.
The thing about that is that number one, I think it's really funny to see Ted Cruz's illusions with people having, because people say, oh, Ted Cruz, he's a liberty guy, but then he doesn't even show up to the Fed vote or the audit the Fed vote, which, A, go and do your job, buddy, show up for work, and second of all, especially for this, if you're going to promote that. And then it comes out that his wife is the director of Goldman Sachs, so all of a sudden that conflict of interest is really clear, and also his lack of, I guess, being genuine, right? I mean, he's just a phony in that regard. But, then you've got the Libertarian Party, which unfortunately doesn't get a lot of attention, but what I find interesting is John McAfee running, because he's kind of a wild man. Now some people say he's not libertarian enough. I'm so sick of the liberty Nazis just saying that you're not liberty enough, because in general he's still going around talking about things that are libertarian, and I would like to see him get a little bit more of a spotlight Not because I like him better than Gary Johnson. I don't know. They both have interesting factors about them, but I think that people really like that Trump is the outsider. That's how he's branded. And I think that people like that Bernie is the outsider. People just want, my dad the other day, he says, Tanya, I would vote for Bonnie Rubble and Fred Flintstone before I would vote for one of these guys. And like my dad likes Trump, and I'm like, oh, Dad, like, oh. But you know, I get where he's coming from, and I think that if you want entertainment and you want an outsider, I think John McAfee is really, really cool. Like, give this man a podium, because at least he's wild and interesting, and he can compete with the entertainment factor for Trump, you know. But I think that
Oh,
Rand
sure.
is still the most, you know, Rand, Jordan and I were talking about this earlier before we got on, and Josh too. We were talking about how Rand, I think, went with the status quo for a while. I don't think he's as radical as his dad, but the question is what's going on underneath, right? And there's a question there, because it shouldn't be an underneath thing. We loved how Ron was always the same thing. Whether or not you agreed with him, you had to respect the fact that at least he was consistent. With Rand, he's gone through a few different phases where you kind of wonder where he stands, and now I guess that he sees that the establishment isn't going to give him a fair shot either way. He's just going a little bit more balls out liberty, and I think that that's pretty cool. A little bit late, slightly disappointing, but at the end of the day, I still think that Rand goes up there, he speaks in a calm, rational fashion. But why are people not interested in rational thought? Are they really that brainwashed? I mean, that gives me a little bit of a reason to wonder about what our future is.
Well, there's several reasons for that. The massive brainwashing campaign that takes place in government-run schools is it plays a big part in that, and people are raised in this system, and I was one of those people, and that's why I didn't give a crap until I had this like divine experience. You know, folks are coming up in the system, tens of millions of people, you know, generations and generations of people are coming up in the system that is not teaching them what their rights are. They're cutting the Revolutionary War out of history curriculums. I mean, there's a reason for that. They don't want the slaves to know that we revolted from England and threw off a tyrannical, oppressive regime, because they don't want to be thrown off. They want our compliance. You know, there's also the mass fluoridation of water supplies all over the country, and water fluoridation is proven to cause docility and depression and make people more, you know, susceptible to suggestion and to, you know, just to be led. They don't want free thinkers. They don't want people, you know, thinking for themselves and looking at people like John McAfee, who might as well be like a purple unicorn, you know, in the room next to all these, you know, donkeys. I mean, it's hilarious to see the game from the outside once you've broken yourself out of this matrix mindset. But to directly answer your question, the mainstream has moved so far away from common sense over years and years of propaganda and indoctrination that common sense sounds crazy. Common sense
Yeah.
sounds like you're talking gibberish to them. They're like, who are you? What planet are you from? What, we
Well,
shouldn't
not
be
only
we
that,
should be bombing the Middle East? What are you talking about?
I think there's this concept of cognitive dissonance where if someone
Absolutely.
invests enough time into a concept, they refuse, even if it's totally logical, they refuse to even look at any evidence that might go against what they've invested in, an idea that they've invested in, because once they believe in that, they think, uh-oh, I've just wasted, I don't know, 10 years of my life thinking this way. And people get really into it, into their idea and their little hold, and they refuse to move away from that. So, you know, it definitely can happen, and as you said, that starts with the schooling system. But
Can
I
I?
think, you know,
No, go ahead.
throughout the world, it's throughout the world, you know, and the internet is changing a lot of things. I mean, a lot of the way that people used to get knowledge is through sort of centrally controlled curriculum. But as we're seeing more and more now, people might have a question that can't be answered. And usually, how do people answer questions? They don't even ask people anymore. They just go straight onto the internet and go, why did the Civil War happen? And then they'll get an explanation. Usually Wikipedia is the first one. But then you start delving down a rabbit hole of, you know, to see more, and you can choose and you can see different different ideas of history and what happened there, and get different opinions. So I think the internet has a big part to play with disrupting the whole that whole idea of a very controlled. I mean, if you go back in history, big history buff, as you can tell, the churches controlled media a lot back before the printing press, and the printing press really obliterated their whole focused control over what people learn, when Martin Luther tried to write his own version, it was very quickly cracked down upon, and the printing press allowed them to pump out different versions of still a ridiculous book, but in my opinion. In general, what happened was the printing press allowed for new information to be available, and the internet is the epitome of that concept, where people can educate themselves. And I don't buy the fact that anymore, that we can't say anymore, I blame the mainstream media, because we don't live in a world where only mainstream media is available to us. If you still don't understand other concepts than the mainstream, then you're way too far gone, because anyone that's got half a brain will have some questions and seek some, two sides of an answer, and you don't just look at the first thing that pops onto the screen.
I have a number of things that I was thinking about during this stuff. I mean, this is a really good combo, but first of all, about how people, they don't want to believe that they are wrong or that they're bad. So I was talking with a friend the other day because Ross Ulbricht has just put in his appeal. It's an excellent appeal. If people want to go online, there's a ton of articles about it. There's actually one by Jamie Redmond on Let's Talk Bitcoin, which is one of the places where we're airing this show in addition to Liberty.me. Reason has a great article. But I was talking with my friend, and we were talking about the appeal, and he says that the issue is that when these three judges come up and they start looking at it, by releasing Ross, or by looking at this case, because there are many things that have merit in terms of him having his constitutional rights violated on multiple levels. But what he said is that this case will challenge them to all of a sudden look at how they've been ruling for the past 20, 30 years of the drug war, right? And they don't want to necessarily acknowledge that what they've been doing is wrong. And that's a real challenge, because right or wrong isn't what's important. People just don't want to feel like they're bad people. So we have to kind of help them accept that their actions previously have been misguided. And while they thought that they were doing a good thing, that case challenges the very fiber of what they've been doing for this long, right? I mean, putting people in jail, ruining people's lives over, a lot of times, just a plant or something that's hurting them and not other people. And then the other aspect is that the importance of art in all of this, right? For me, if I hadn't read 1984, which certainly was meant to be an instruction manual, and if I hadn't listened to music, I always say Cat Stevens and that Peace Train song, I remember listening to it and not only being all jazzed up from listening to really good music, but also realizing the power that music has had. And that's why I think things like what Jordan is doing, what Troy at Crypto Art is doing, what all of us are trying to do through the arts is so important. I'm surprised that they even let us read 1984 and Brave New World and Fahrenheit 451, because the contrast of those books and the reality that we're living is really incredible, because there's elements of that in our real lives, and those were dystopian novels that were not meant to be something that came true. And I think that those are real points where people can awaken. I mean, Jordan, do you think that your music has woken up people, and why do you think that music is, I mean, obviously I assume that I know what your answer is going to be, but why do you think that music has that power? Why do you think that art is such an important component about that? Because think about it, you don't have a single anti-war song on the radio in the past 15 years. And I was at dinner the other day and I was talking with people about that, and they're like, yeah, well, there's a song about Black Lives Matter and that's become the anthem. And not to diminish the Black Lives Matter movement, because I think that that's an important component of the discussion, But there's something inherently a little weird about that, because it's like, well, all lives matter, right? And there are certainly racial issues, but I hate focusing on that. I think that the larger issue is state versus the people, you know, and I don't think that it's as simple as to divide us all through these lines of color, and or, you know, religion or sexual preference. All those things I think are used to divide a larger issue of power structure versus the people. So Jordan, can you speak to that a little bit with your experiences?
Sure. Well, you just brought up a whole lot of stuff. So let's
Yeah,
start at
no.
the let's
A
start at
whole
the end,
can
and
of worms.
yeah, let's start at the end, and we'll go back to the beginning. I would say it is that simple, that dividing people along arbitrary lines like race and religion and these things, that these have always been political tools for controlling people. And black people in this country, I think, have been completely swindled by the state to believe that the problem of police brutality is this white versus black thing. There's just as many white people getting killed as there are black people. Go to killedbypolice.net and you can see the statistics for yourself. It's a live real-time database of every person that gets killed by police. It was like, almost 2,000 people got killed last year in America by police. We have 70 times the amount of people that are killed by police in America is 70 times the rate of any other first world nation. So
What
it has
about versus terrorism? That must be far greater.
it's something like you're 8 or 9 times more likely to be killed by a police officer than a terrorist. I mean, terrorism is a result of the militarization of or I would say like the use of our military all over the world, creating problems. There's no reason for us to be in 193 countries. There's no reason for that. Music and art are expressions of our infinite selves. They are non-threatening ways of conveying an idea. You paint a picture of something, and it inspires something, a reaction in someone, an emotional, visceral reaction. You write a song that defines an issue, and the music is the vehicle for that message, and it gets in you. It's like water. It can get inside of a rock and split it open. Well, music can get inside someone's soul and set it free from their programming, from their conditioning. The emotional component of our nature, the spiritual component of our nature, can overcome any kind of conditioning or programming that we're subjected to. It's a way to get through into people. And I'll give you an example. A couple years ago, when I first put my Liberty album out, my manager at the time sent it to this Clear Channel radio programming director up in Boston. This guy is like the gatekeeper for the entire Northeast, all right? And he calls my manager up and he says, I listened to the whole album and I loved it. This is awesome. We're going to play this all over. I got like 25 stations we're going to play this on. This is going to be huge. And then we were all excited. And then 2 days later, the same guy calls him back and says, we're never playing this album. This guy, I listened to it again. This guy supports Ron Paul, and I hear what he's talking about now. This is never getting played. But the point of the story is that the music got into this guy. He liked it. He actually loved it. But he had like this allergic reaction to the message once he really let it in. But it got in, and that's the point. Music and art, all different forms of art, have a way of penetrating through our cognitive dissonance, through our walls that we put up to protect our ideas, to protect our worldview from any outside interference. It's actually pretty amazing. And the first question was, do I know if my music has changed any lives? There's a handful that I know because they've told me. I don't have any idea of the impact I've had. You have no idea of the impact that you have, but you have an impact. We all do. I'm not omniscient, so I don't know how many people, but I've had people over the years write to me or come up and talk to me in tears telling me how much this or that song, and they were usually songs that I like downloaded from the ether. Like I had nothing to do with it. I was just there and just wrote it all down. And I didn't even think about what I was writing. It just came out. Those are usually the songs that impact people the most. So I can't help feeling that I'm being, guided, by this force that's giving me this message of liberty that completely transformed my life. My music has transformed my own life because I feel like I'm one of the people listening to it too. But I've had some people tell me, like, this is the song that convinced me that I should leave the military, or this is the song that I listen to in the morning just to give me strength to get through the day. And I don't think that has anything to do with me personally. I don't think there's anything special about me. It's these songs that are special, and I'm just kind of like giving and sharing them.
Um, do you think, have you spent much time in Europe or Asia or Australia? How do you see, the topics that you bring up in song or music in other parts of the world? Do you see that we are, that because a lot of Americans seem to think that they're the only free country in the world, and then when you go overseas, you realize, wow, really, they're really not that free anymore. They used to be, but
Sure.
compared to like Asia, I mean, you go there, the markets are unreal. I mean, you don't need a license for any. So there's a total opposite scale.
Sure.
Or in Europe, there's a lot of tiny countries that are, quote unquote free. But yeah, how do you see that for people that don't travel much, or obviously you're a bit more traveled, being a musician and touring a lot.
The only country I've spent significant time in outside the United States is South Africa. I spent a little bit of time in England, not much, and I've spent a week with Tatiana in Chile, and didn't really get a sense of what people were dealing with down there. I some sense, but not so I can speak to it from any kind of intelligent podium. But having left the United States and spent significant time outside the United States and looking back on it, I think that we have been bred here in the U.S. with this idea of American exceptionalism, that like you said, that we think we're the only free country. We're not free at all. Are you kidding me? We have the illusion of freedom. We're free-range slaves to me. I mean, that's how I see us now. We have all these creature comforts and we're able to move around, so we think that we're free. But as you said, I mean, we're so many aspects of our lives are completely under control, and most of the time we're not even aware of it. It's that it's that ingrained in us that we don't even know that we're under control. We just accept these things blindly. We get marriage licenses. We get permission to get married. We ask permission to catch a fish in the river. We ask permission to be able to travel up and down the road.
Meanwhile, there's mega trawlers just sucking fish out like crazy. Yet you need a license for with your son to go fishing on the creek. It's ridiculous. But
exactly.
Yeah, it's definitely skewed. I think when you look at art, just going back to your previous comment there, it's always been an important part of subversion. Because it's kind of, especially if you look at cartoons, for instance, in the newspaper, they've always been able to quickly, put something quite sneaky in there, quite subversive, and only really quite clever people can actually see what that is. And, you see art making, there was a large movement in the East Germany and East Berlin when there was the state was always keeping an eye on art as well. You think, what?
Sure.
Why is he picking on some little artist? But really, from little things, big things grow.
That's for sure.
I wanted to jump in here because we're talking about the perception of the United States being free. And the other day I started thinking about, how do so many movies get made? Who in the world would invest in this? It's such a risky business. And then I started looking into how do war movies get made. And I think that, all around the world we have the most robust film industry. And I have begun thinking that is a lot more associated with propaganda than I had originally thought about. Because if you have a war movie, right, There's certain types of war movies, and up until very, very recently, because of CGI, if you wanted to make a war movie and you wanted to use, you know, an F-15 or some tanks and all this stuff, you actually had to go to the Pentagon, and they had to approve your script, and then they would allow you to make a movie with their F-15 or whatever, you know, bombing stuff that they had. And I think that this is something that I had been speaking to a girlfriend. She's Syrian. Her background is Syrian. And we were talking about how all these Syrians are traveling around the world. And yes, you know, there may be some problems with having these different cultures clashing, but she said it must be so sad for them because they loved American culture. They believed that America was the land of the free and, you know, we'll take in your downtrodden and all this nonsense. And now they're in for a rude awakening because we're saying, get these damn Muslims out of our country, make them wear a patch. I mean, make them wear a patch. Hold on, what are you talking about? And this film industry has such an impact on the way that people view us, and unless people take the time to educate themselves a little bit more, they don't even realize that we are not this free place. We have the largest prison population in the world. And why, wait a second, we're the land of the free. Amnesty International just said that all 50 states are in violation of national standards for how police should behave. So all 50 states basically have police officers who are able to kill citizens without any kind of punishment. Most police officers, they don't even have to report that they killed somebody. It's voluntary. So there's no national registry unless it's a private institution that is taking a tally of how many cops are killing people. If you want to fight in court, it costs so much money. You know, Ross has just filed an appeal, and it's cost $14,000 for the paperwork just to file the appeal. That doesn't even speak to the cost of the attorneys. So how is that something that people can afford? If you're poor and if you live in a bad area and you're targeted by the police, a lot of times these are along racial lines. I mean, a lot of poor areas have minorities and stuff. How are these poor people who are not getting a very good education, who are growing up occasionally dependent on the system that suppresses them, how in the world are they supposed to get themselves out of jail? Thankfully, they have this Making of a Murderer movie series, rather, on HBO that's educating people, and you have Ross is very fortunate. He has been a leader. He has so many people that support him. But what about the poor people that don't have that support? And you're going to talk about a just system? I mean, there's complete, total delusions about what we have going on. People watch, you know, shows about police officers and the court system, and they think that you're going to get a fair trial. BS. Most people are bullied into having a, they don't even go to trial. They have to take a plea deal because your chances of winning in a trial are so minuscule that you're better off taking a plea. And this is a just system, but don't worry, just watch what you see in Hollywood. And then all of a sudden you understand why these movies that potentially have such a huge risk are being funded, because there are other interests in mind. And I find it to be really revolting. I don't even want to go to the movies anymore. Most of the movies are just propaganda. And I just want to watch a real movie about real human emotion and about destroying those lines, those divisive things that they use to keep us apart. And
well, it's not only movies though.
That's Hollywood.
You get also games. I mean, gaming is far bigger than the movie or music industry put together now, and a lot of the war games are openly funded by the Pentagon, and then they advertise to the best players. Like, I've seen screen grabs of the best players getting, you know, contacted in game to join the US military. It's just like, wow. Yeah.
I wanted to, you know,
Jordan,
we're coming up.
You're on mute.
We're coming up on the back of the show, right? And we're going to be going to broadcast this to Let's Talk Bitcoin. I really should change it up. I always leave the secret phrase for the end, but there's a magic word or a magic series of words that we can use. Jordan, perhaps you want to give us a phrase or a word that you want the LTB audience to use in order to get their LTB coin. It's a really cool program that Adam and the team over at Tokenly have kind of helped implement, the Let's Talk Bitcoin network. Do you want to give us a phrase? I like it to be something to remind people of something important. I like it to have a little bit of meaning. So do you have one for us?
I absolutely do.
All right.
Well,
I had a feeling you did.
well, as you know, I'm a husband and father of 6 beautiful little anarchist children, and I think that it's super important that people who are in the know and have educated themselves and are conscientious objectors to the horrifying policies of financial terrorism and international terrorism should get to work making more babies. And so I think the phrase should be outbreed the statists.
That's a good one. I like it. Make love, not war.
Yeah.
So outbreed, outbreed, the statists. So
Yes.
3 words. I like that. I thought that you were going to say arm yourselves.
Get onto it, folks.
What's interesting about Jordan is a big Second Amendment supporter, as am I. I know this is a little bit of a divisive topic, and we can leave that for another show. But Jordan has made a song that I think is very poignant. When people had the Second Amendment, it wasn't anything having to do with hunting. It had to do with protecting, being the last step for protecting ourselves from tyranny. And I think that that's something that is lost in this conversation a lot of times. So Jordan has a really great song called Arm Yourselves. He's been kind of promoting it around. I encourage you guys to please download it. Please support him. The Artist Coin thing is moving along, so I think I'm going to try and drag Jordan into the Artist Coin thing once we make it really nice and easy for people. But in the meantime, if you want to support him, you can go and check out the song. He also has some really great music talking about really heavy issues, a little bit more rock and roll than me, but I think that that's good because, I got the hippies, you got the more rock people, and then we come together to make beautiful music. Jordan, where can people catch up with you and find out more about what you're working on?
Well, jordanpagemusic.com right here. That's like the main place. That's got all my music is for sale there. You can actually stream all of my songs for free there, so you can listen to it before you buy. My calendar, photos, videos. There's a new education page on my website, just the education tab. You push that, and there's lots of videos about freedom and about the major issues of the day. So jordanpagemusic.com is the main place. You can also find me on iTunes, Google Play Store, Amazon, Pandora, Rhapsody, Spotify, whatever outlet you use to download music or to stream music, I'm there. So just Google my name. I'm on Twitter at Jordan Page Music, Facebook also. Follow me on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and yeah, definitely arm yourselves, people. Without your Second Amendment, you lose all the other ones that you got. So like in the 20th century alone, over 270 million people were murdered by their governments following gun confiscation. Everybody, screams 250 million people have been killed by Muslims in the last 1,400 years. In the last 100 years, 270 million people were killed by the state. So the state is the real source of the problem. We need to, abolish the state, buy Bitcoin, use Bitcoin, and let's change the world. That's my 2 cents.
I like it.
Drop the mic.
Drop the mic. I think that's a really interesting statistic because people are constantly saying, "Oh, yeah, but what about if that doesn't exist?" Ooh. But you see private murder compared to like major wars. It's so drastically different. I mean, 270,000 people in the last 100 years is incredible.
70 million, 270 million.
Million. Yeah.
By far more than any other things, and that's why it's frustrating when people talk about these shootings, which there's always some sort of funny things around those shootings that are a little bit questionable. But we're not even going to talk about that. Your chances of being killed in a terrorist attack are very, very slim. However, we're going around bombing people. Why does a life here in America matter so much more than a life in the Middle East where we're meddling constantly? And I think that that's a question that we all need to kind of look into and remember that peace is always something that we need to strive for, and we need to expect that from our governments. If we don't get a non-government society, if we don't go completely anarchist, we need to be at least pushing things in the direction of freedom and to be really thoughtful when we say support our troops. Does that mean support them going off into other countries and murdering people? I mean, these people that are terrorists are not just, hey man, I was really bored today, I think I'm going to go blow myself up. In fact, in Iraq, before the United States invaded, there had never in the history of the country been a single suicide bomber. But since then, there have been approximately 2,000 people that have done that. Why are they doing that? I mean, these people are not so different from us. And
Because they hate your freedom. They hate it.
yeah, they hate our freedom, and yet our own government is the one that's taking away the very freedoms that a lot of these soldiers go off in defense of, and that's
No,
why they're killing themselves when they come back.
yeah.
If they come back because of the horrors that they've seen and because they know that they were, joining these wars on a very fake premise, I think that that is a really major issue for them. They're hopped up on all these crazy medications. Let's look at the medications. But that's all stuff for another time.
All the drugs they get on the line. I mean, we know someone here in Germany who also was in Afghanistan, and yeah, I mean the drugs that were pumped in through official channels, unofficially, were amazing. Like all the illegal ones, and you're out there all hyped up, just trying to stay awake. And then there's no support afterwards. No support at all for these people. And that's, I think, in terms of support, it's like going to therapy, talking through the horrific things people have seen, and to talk about what you brought up about suicide bombers. If folks, if someone has invaded your country, and you've seen soldiers break in and kill your father or mother in front of you, and you're left there struggling, do you really feel like they're not going to do anything against that? They're not going to, get totally angry and make it their life mission to do that little bit of damage that they can do? Of course, and this is the concept of blowback, is that you can't just waltz around the world under this flag of freedom that doesn't really exist anyway, and sit there, and not expect anything back. It just happens. So I think it's a really important thing that you say, and the concept. I think a lot of people after the Vietnam War, when the soldiers came back and people were spitting on them and stuff, in Australia anyway, I'm not sure how it was in America, but then after that, this whole notion of support the troops came out, and this was bantered and bantered and bantered, and it was like, yeah, look, I understand that in one way, but at the same time, there's a difference between supporting these poor young kids that go off and are really, that's their only choice. They don't have any other options. They just have the option of, hey, join the army, adventures. And then they come back totally messed in the head, and then have no options. And what, for me, support the troops is when someone comes back from a war, give them some help dealing with
Compassion.
some compassion, some of the
Well,
trauma
think
that
about,
they've dealt.
the people coming back from Vietnam didn't even want to go.
Yeah.
And they're getting spit on, and they have no services to help the veterans. And now all they want to do is take away the guns from the veterans. It's like, oh, they were good enough over there, but now they're not allowed to have them. I mean, this could go on forever. But anyway, I think we've got to wrap up the show. Thank you very much to Liberty.me for hosting us. Always a great team over there. You guys can sign up. There's some really great articles over there if you want to learn a little bit more. Let's Talk Bitcoin. Those are my peeps. Love the crew over there. Jordan, you got to keep making awesome music. I hope that I get to see you soon, and then we could jam together again. It's been a while. Josh, come visit us. And I don't know. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We'll be on next week. I think that we have John Light on next week. John Light is super cool, and also, thinking about keeping us free. Love you, everybody. Be kind to each other. Peace out, and I'll see you all soon. Thank you.
Peace. Ciao.
Peace.